Good morning. My name is Susan Sekaquaptewa. I work for Cooperative Extension for the federally recognized tribal extension program up on the Hopi Reservation. Today is March 14th, 2021, and this is part of our gardening series that we're offering virtually. And today's topic is called garden calendaring. We will be sharing all the different pieces of information that you need to know to plan out your own garden calendar. So we're glad you're here and glad you could join us, and just remind you to keep your questions to the end. So this is a picture here on the left of on the screen of a garden calendar. I just did a search and you can find a whole bunch online of different ways people choose to lay out their garden calendars. Garden calendaring is really unique and specific to your growing area. So when you do your research and you look up online, don't just pick any calendar, because that might be for a growing environment that is very different than yours. So today we're going to learn about all the different areas that we have available. We're going to look at all the different topics and elements for our area that will influence and create our own growing calendar. So, but this gives you an idea of what one may look like. This is a nice one with pictures. Some of the workshop objectives that we will be reviewing today and what you will learning is you will learn what a growing calendar is and how to begin one for yourself. We will review the Hopi growing season, because there is a season here that we understand. We're going to look at that as a concept and then take that idea and apply it to other kinds of vegetables. We're going to learn the variables related to plant timing, because you need to understand plant timing to create a calendar. We're going to review your planting zones and climate descriptions, because that also influences heavily what you can grow and when you grow it. And then we're going to look at your own decisions and your own plans. So this is really important, because a lot of people ask me to share with them what my growing calendar is. And that's really an unfair way to look at this, because I don't know what commitment you have. I don't know what time you have to invest. And that's going to be different between all of us. So I just want us to look at that piece and understand what that means for each of us. And then we're going to start to create our own growing calendars for a couple of plants. You're going to get some data on the other plants, but I just want you to start right now with two. So if you haven't already, get your notebooks out, your journals, your pencils. We will be looking at doing some of this work toward the end, okay? So what is a growing calendar? It's really a guide. It's a guide to help tell us when it is the optimal time to plant any type of vegetable, flower, or any kind of plant that you want to grow. So we're vegetable growers. A lot of us in this group are vegetable growers. So it's going to help guide us on when we can grow whatever vegetable we're interested in growing. It can be a visual guide, as you see here on the page, or it can be a more handout version, and that's kind of what we're going to share with you, is a way to fill in some data. But it can tell you things like when to start transplants or seeds indoors if you're doing transplants. It can help guide you of when you put your transplants outside to plant outside. It can help you determine when you're going to put seeds outside to plant. Or it can, and of course, even tell you whenever you plant something, when will you be able to harvest it? So it's putting everything that we kind of inherently figure out in our head, but pulling it out and putting it on paper. And the reason we have growing calendars is because we're trying to grow a variety of different things at once or throughout the same time. And all these different vegetables are different. They don't have the same characteristics. So this allows us to get way more organized, learn when that plant likes the weather, put it down on paper. And then the biggest piece is it helps us remember what we're gonna do next year. So we're learning things every year. We document that, and then we use that data and information to help remind us of what did we do last year? Because this is a new year now and I forgot. And that's okay. So this is perfect. When I visit with you all, I always tell everyone, please document everything. please write everything down. So remember, your garden journals are a big part of this. So this is just another version of a guide or planting calendar, and it's pretty similar to the last one. You see there's the days of the months at the top from January to December. So each one of these blocks is considered, the month of the year. And then they kind of coded theirs between turquoise all the way to green. And turquoise for them means we're going to start these plants, they're going to start those seeds indoors, like in a greenhouse kind of situation, as transplants. And then as we move to the middle of the color scheme between green sakwasa, that's the blue-green color, they're telling us that means we're going to either direct sow, we're going to take the seed and plant it outside directly, or we're going to take that transplant that we started indoors and move it outside and put it out there. And then the green will tell us when we kind of harvest, when we should expect to harvest. So let's just look at two things on this chart really quickly. Beans, we all know beans. Here at Hopi Land, we all grow beans. So it says we plant those end of March or beginning of April. This one says they're starting them indoors. At Hopi, when we grow our Hopi foods, we don't necessarily transplant, we all direct seed. So that's a little bit different. And then we don't harvest until end of October. So this gives you an idea for beans, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 7 months they need to grow up. And I'm guessing this is a bean that's a hard bean, a dry bean like hatiko. You need to have it mature completely out, that pod dries, and then we have that dried bean. It takes 7 months. And so that gives you an idea. And it's growing during the hot time. The main part of the time it grows is hot. Now let's look at broccoli or beets, because they're kind of similar, right below beans. We're going to, and this is for zone 7, and we'll get to that in a bit, but I'm just talking about how they're laying this out. In this chart, they're going to start beets indoors, looks like beginning of March, and they're going to transplant outside in April. They're going to start harvesting them in end of May, beginning of June. And then they're going to do it again. They're going to plant some more transplants in the beginning of August, put them outside in September, and start picking them by end of October or early November. So beets only take 3 months. So you see how different beets are from beans already. They're grown in cooler weather. They're slower growing than the beans. So you're getting a taste of how when we're putting all this together, we really have to know our environment. We have to know about the plants, and that's what we're going to get to today. When we're looking at plant timing or planting a calendar, these are all the different pieces that we're going to go through to learn about what it takes to put a calendar together. We're going to define your season, and we all have different definitions for those. We are going to we're going to look at transplants or sowing seeds directly, because those have different timings. We're going to look at both of those a little bit. We are going to look at cold and warm weather plants, because that also tells you when you can plant or should plant them, and what your climate is. And we're going to look at something called a planting zone. So we're going to go all of these things, plus some other tools, will help us determine how do we create our own calendar. Because this workshop is brought to you by the Hopi Cooperative Extension Office and is targeted to our Hopi community members, I chose to start this session with helping you look at the Hopi growing calendar or Hopi growing season, because we are all pretty familiar with this, and I just kind of took it out of my head and put it down on paper. And we'll look at this is a version of what a Hopi growing calendar would look like. So at the top we have March, and these are the months in between March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, and November. So just like the other growing calendars, we have kind of the year listed on top. This next line denotes the relatively average first frost and last frost for our area. And this is based on the research that I've been doing. I've been growing for 20 years, and I've been documenting at least the last 10 in calendars when we've had our first frost of the end of the year and when we had our last frost. So let's go here. This is May, and this is roughly middle of May. on average, Hopi receives the last night, overnight low of 32 degrees around the middle of May. That's pretty average. I mean, that means that's our last frost of the winter, and it's starting, we're already warming up, but by now there's no more overnight lows at 30 degrees on average. But who remembers last year, we had an overnight low, we had a very cold night, like May 31st. Remember, all our plants froze outside. So this is just an average. This is not the be all end all, but generally speaking, our last frost of the year is the middle of May. It gets warmer, gets very, very hot, and then it starts to cool down. And by middle of October is when we get our very first frost, meaning the overnight lows get down to 32 degrees around the middle of October. So when we're looking at a Hopi summer growing season, this is really our growing season, generally speaking. So let's look down at some of the things that we grow here at Hopi. I just put hatiko bean. I know we grow other kinds of beans, but we have a hatiko bean, which is a dry bean. We plant them as early in the ground by early to mid-April, around there. And they grow all year long. And we hope they don't freeze, right? Because by probably, even though we plant them in early April, by early March, they're already coming up out of the ground. So this is a really tenuous time, because once they come up out of the ground, we're at the mercy of the Mother Earth to see if she stays warm. But if we get past that point, they grow all summer long. And finally, we start to pick them sometime between mid to late September, all the way till it finally freezes. But this is a dry bean. So you see how long a Hopi dry bean takes: April, May, June, July, August, September, October, six months or so. It takes half the year for us to just get beans. So let's look at corn. And we grow corn in two stages. We have our early corn and our big field corn. Early corn might be grown just past the beans, and we pick it fresh, right? We pick it samivaya, that fresh green corn. We pick it. We don't let it completely mature, and we're picking that by probably early to mid-July or so. So right here again is tenuous, because once we plant it in the ground, we don't want it to freeze, because if it freezes, boop, it dies. We have to plant again. And the later we plant it, the later the harvest is. So you see corn, for green corn, only needs about 1, 2, 3 months. If we look at the big fields where we're going to harvest our big corn that's going to grow to maturity, planters or farmers might start growing beginning of May. They might grow 2-3 times between May and June, just different colors, different fields. But whenever they plant whatever they plant first, those will be ready first. So I put harvest 1 and 2, because sometimes we pick some of that early, and then most of it we wait until it's mature. So you're starting to see all this stuff is in our farmers' heads. They just know this. They've been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years. They just know this. So as women, if you're females on the group today, we don't necessarily pay this much attention, because our male counterparts are the ones that do this for us. But we need to understand this, because we apply the same principles when we grow vegetables. We need to understand, what are we growing, and when do we start it, and how long is it going to take for us to pick something that's green, or do I have to wait till it's fully mature to pick it? All these different things go into place. So the P represents plant, and the H represents harvest. If we look at this growing season, you're going to notice that Hopis primarily traditionally grew warm plants, because we needed to wait till the earth warmed up. We used the warm season, and they were harvested and picked before it got cold. So this is what's known to some degree as a Hopi growing calendar. This is not, the calendar. Every Hopi farmer has their own nuances of when they do things, how they learned it, and they definitely don't write it down. This is just all inherently knowledge. But this is how we should approach our own growing calendars for things like carrots or beets or cucumbers, whatever it is you want to grow. And the reason we're going to document it is because it might be our farmers are really good at being able to manage and learn 6 plants and keep that memory in their head. When you're growing 20 different plants or 30 different kinds of different plants, if your brain is strong enough to handle all that knowledge, beautiful. But I am now at a point where I need to write this down. And this is the whole point. We encourage you to have a journal calendar and just a regular calendar for your garden, because there's so much nuance in here the more we diversify the plants that we're growing. Does that make sense? None of the Hopi seeds that we grow are transplants, traditional planting. We don't grow any transplants. We get the seed and they put it in the ground. So this is another difference between how we might grow our own gardens and with some new knowledge. Now we can follow the same kind of principle if we want to do things really, really easy. Meaning we can just direct seed everything we're going to grow, and then we'll just work with the warm season that we have, and then they'll be ready when they're ready. But for gardeners, one of the bigger things that we add, the complexity that we add to our growing life is our transplants. So you can put seeds directly in the ground with some plants because that's just what they like to do. I mean, they don't like to be grown this way. They don't like to be moved around. They just do better when we plant them in the ground. But there's a lot of other plants that we grow early inside in a greenhouse to help give us a head start. Because if we put the tomato seed in the ground, we might not get tomatoes until September. And then if middle of October is the last frost, we only get tomatoes for like 6 weeks. So this is why we buy transplants. We start them early somewhere else, and then we put them outside when they're already so big or so old. And that gives us more tomatoes. That gives us maybe 8 more weeks of tomatoes. So instead of picking our first one in September, we're now picking them at the end of, see what's 2 weeks later, August, July, middle of July, we're starting to pick them now instead of end of September. So transplants. So when we talk about transplants, they're just young plants, right? They're young plants that we're starting in a greenhouse. They can be anywhere from 2 weeks old to 10 weeks old, depending on the plant. By the time you buy them and put them in the garden, they're already 2.5 months old or 2 months old or a couple weeks old. It just depends on the plant. So we as gardeners do buy transplants or grow transplants so we can get that head start. So we can get that tomato earlier in the season or whatever it is. So if you choose to use transplants, or even more complicated, if you choose to grow transplants, that just kind of builds your experience, which is great, but you're going to have to start tracking and timing out. Okay, how long does it take for me to get this size plant, the kind I buy at Walmart? How long does it take for me to get a plant like that, and what do I have to do? So as far as the calendar purpose, we're going to have to really learn that piece, but and that's okay. We're going to learn it. We're going to learn it together. And this is another reason why I tell beginning gardeners, especially, let's just start growing 1 or 2 plants this year, because if you try and grow 12 all at once the first time, it gets overwhelming. So we're just going to learn a couple plants really well for a year, and then now we know that plant, and next year we're going to grow 2 other kinds. We'll already have known 2. We're going to learn 2 more. In a couple years, I'll know 4 more plants, etc. So let's look at the life of a tomato grown outside. There's a seed, right? We have a tomato seed. We put that outside, a tomato, or we transplant it and then plant it outside, and then we harvest it and the plant dies. I mean, that's a life of every seed. We plant it, whether it's a seed or we plant it as a transplant. At some point that plant goes outside and then it grows. We harvest the fruit, and at some point that plant dies. Most of the plants that we grow around here that we know as vegetables that we find relatively easy, tomatoes, chilies, those are warm weather plants. They're plants that like warm weather. So that's why we grow them kind of when it starts to get warm. That's why they do so well in the warm weather. And then they die because they can't handle the cold weather anymore. So most of us start with seemingly what they seem easy. It's because they're tailored to the summer growing season. And so one time when I was first learning, I didn't know any of this stuff when I was first learning. I was desperate to grow spinach. So I did the exact same thing I did with the spinach that I did with the tomato. I didn't know how to grow my own transplants. I went to the store and I bought spinach transplants and I said, oh, I'm going to put those in too. I can't wait to grow my own spinach. And I put them both in. The tomato did well, didn't have too much problems with it, but the spinach, it just flowered really quick. I maybe picked 2 little leaves and then it just flowered. So I bought some more and I kept doing it over and over, like 2-3 years. And I just didn't know what was wrong. I'm like, why can I not grow spinach? It was really frustrating. I found out a little later that spinach likes cold weather, the cooler weather. They can't stand the hot weather. And I was trying to grow spinach in a hot environment. And so everything I was doing, I was blaming myself for doing everything wrong. And it turns out it's just, you have to understand the plant. So we all make these mistakes, and hopefully these lessons will help teach you how we can, you can learn from my mistakes, really. So let's learn about what warm and cool weather plants. Throughout the whole world, every plant, whether we grow them as a vegetable or whether they're wild, are considered warm or cold, meaning there's plants that prefer cooler temperatures, cooler environments. They thrive in those areas. And then there's other plants who will not grow in those environments because they like it cool. And naturally, that's just where you find them. So we learn this when we go neveni picking, when we go pick those wild plants and forage. We know there's some that come up early in the spring. Guess what? They are cool weather plants. And then we don't pick others until later in the season when it warms up. Guess what? Those are warm weather plants. So we already kind of knew that, but we just maybe didn't think of it that way. All vegetable plants are the same way. There's some that like warm weather and cool weather. So when we're looking at trying to figure out when do we plant what, so when we're looking at both warm and cool, what the plant depends on during that season, the weather, your climate, and the condition that it likes best. So even though we're just saying cool weather, it's really a lot of things. What is our weather going to be like? What is the climate, meaning our elevation and temperature ranges? And what does that plant really like to grow in? What's the best condition? So we're going to look at warm and cool weather, that idea a little bit more. So cool weather plants. Here's a beautiful spinach. This is not my spinach plant. I'm going to try spinach again for the first time this year in a long time. So cool weather plants, these crops like cooler conditions. And so they need to be planted. So when they're mature, this is getting ready to be picked, it's cool. So right now it's actually a little chilly out there. It's actually kind of cold. It's right above freezing. Cool might mean like 40 degrees, 50 degrees. So when we plant, if I'm going to grow spinach, which is a cool weather plant, I'm probably going to start it in January or so, because by the time it's ready to go outside and grow more, it's going to be cooler, not cold, but cooler, like March, like now. So we're looking at how long does it take for that plant to get to that point, and roughly what is our temperatures going to be like. You see how tricky it can be? Depending on where you live, this could be springtime, and for Hopi, where we live, it's springtime or fall. But in Phoenix, for example, they can grow spinach in wintertime because it's ideal conditions in December and January in Phoenix, but that's way too cold for us. So it really depends on where you live and your climate. So cool season crops can be planted when the soil is cool. And I said I said about 40 degrees, but as low as 40 degrees. So now we're getting temperatures out, we're measuring temperature, we're measuring soil temperature. It gets a little tricky when you're starting to figure out what you can grow when. Mature cool season crops can survive in near freezing temperatures. So once a plant gets big enough, like this spinach, it can go lower than 40, maybe very close to 32 degrees. We might need to help it along if it gets really cold. So this is when you as a grower have to figure out, okay, I got my plants outside. What do I have? How cold can they get? Do I need to go help them out overnight? This is some of the things that we do when we're trying to work in our environment. So cool season crops do not do well in the summer heat. So we are March 14th. The temperature right now, according to my phone, is 28 degrees. That's below, no, that was earlier this morning. It's 36 degrees. It's above freezing. Our high today is 52 degrees, so that's pretty warm. So the spinach will be beautiful out there. We had this spinach growing right now, this mature spinach. It would do great. I am not going to take something that likes hot weather and put it out there because I might kill it or it just might not grow. So this is when we begin to figure this piece out. Then we go to warm weather plants. So this is what we know. We know warm weather plants. All of us grow warm weather plants as part of our gardens, our summer gardens. So these are plants like chili and tomato, and we'll get to learn a little bit more here in a bit. But they're crops planted so when they are mature, the weather is warm or even hot. So chili just loves hot weather. We start them as transplants early. We put them out before, after we know there's going to be no more freezes, because if it freezes, it's dead. It doesn't like it. So we make sure it's warm enough when it's big, and we put it outside. And then throughout the whole summer, it just gets bigger and bigger. And at some point, it starts pumping out all these chilies for us. And then as it cools off, it starts to stop growing. So what is warm? When I say warm, what do I mean? That's when the soil temperatures are at least 50 degrees or above. Now, some of you might have come to our workshop last month or so by KNEF. I think it was end of January. She taught a class on herbs. She didn't say this in that workshop, but I saw another presentation from her, and she was talking about a particular herb. I think it's basil. She said, basil loves warm weather. Don't plant basil until you know your soil is warm. And she said her grandmother had a really great trick for that. Instead of going out with a temperature gauge, she said, pull down her pants and sit on the ground. And if you can handle that, you're comfortable, that means your soil is warm enough. Which I thought was perfect. So sometimes, we don't need the temperature gauge, but if we're warm enough, the plant's going to be warm enough. And so we don't plant basil until we know it's going to be warm. So those are things tricks that we learn. Warm weather crops grow best when it's 75 degrees or higher. That's our summer times. We even get up to like 100 degrees, so it can get really warm. Warm weather crops do not do well in cooler temperatures, and they will not survive freezing temperatures. Just like me, I don't like to be cold. I'm actually chilled right now in my short sleeve shirt. I would prefer to be wearing a blanket. I can't go camping in the wintertime. Like right now, it's too cold for me. I would be miserable out there if I was trying to camp. And then there's other people who say, this isn't cold. This is great. I love it. Let's go camping. And I love camping in the winter when it's snow outside. I'm like, you guys are crazy. It's that same kind of thing. I'm more of a tomato chili. I like the warmer weather. And others can handle or prefer it cooler. So so part of what we're learning is just the system and how we look at our environment. But we really have to learn plants. We have to date them. We have to get to know them. We have to understand what they like. And most of us start with plants that like warm weather: chili, tomatoes, cucumbers, maybe potatoes. Some of us have all started with at least chili and tomatoes. And because they like it warm, that's when we kind of grow. But when you're trying to grow outside of those times, or you're trying to grow something that likes cooler weather, that's when it gets tricky, because then we have to start paying more attention. So the other thing that determines what you grow and when you can grow it is your climate. And there is something called a planting zone or growing zone. And you'll see these when you do your own research for planting calendars, and we'll get to learn what our planting zone here is in our region. So remember, temperatures, both high and low, can limit, inhibit, or even help plants grow or thrive. It just depends on the plant. So your climate is determined by your elevation, And we are at Hopi roughly around 5,000 elevation here in the valleys. But we have people who live up in the mesa tops and they have a different elevation. They get more snow, it's colder. They're probably closer to 5,800, 5,800, or close to 6,000. So these elevations determine your area's temperatures, your highs and your lows, and generally the rainfall you receive. So all this ties into what can I grow and when can I grow them. U.S. Department of Ag had created a plant hardiness zone map for the whole country. It defines all the climates in the country, and it applies a number to those climates, and then we roughly know what our number is. That's called our zone, and that designation helps us as growers figure out what will thrive in our zone. So that helps us understand and match vegetables to our zone. So this map is all gardeners look and find out what zone they are, and that kind of helps begin as a starting point for them. The link is called planthardiness.ars.usda.gov. And when you get to that website, you just enter your zip code and it tells you what zone you are in. So this begins to help us figure out, okay, if I'm in zone whatever, I look and begin to read about plants and learn about plants. It's going to say, oh, these can grow between zones 4 and 8, or this can only grow between 7, 8, 9, and you'll begin to see what that is. The lower numbers are way warmer areas, so like Phoenix might be a lower number. The higher numbers are places that get very cold. Higher elevation zones. We sit at about zone 7. It's a general map and a general kind of, system, because there are a bunch of different pockets even within our area where we grow. So even though if I just go by zone 7 alone, I'll learn a lot. But in my growing area right outside, I have an area, my big garden is in one elevation, and then I've chose to plant in a little wash as well. So the wash bed is only like 8 feet lower, but I can already tell the zone it's cooler down there. It gets a little more damp. There's a lot more water flow because of the reach. So even we have little microclimates. So when I talk about microclimates, even those are little tiny pockets of little places that either get cooler or warmer than your actual zone. So other tools. So these are just all different things that we begin to learn about that help us figure out where are we at climate or weather speaking, and what plants can grow in our area. If you follow just the Hopi growing season, the Hopis have defined our growing season as summer, roughly from May to October. And we know how to grow what vegetables grow in that time frame. That's kind of what they've defined. But if you want to grow other things that are not warm weather plants, how do we fit those in? That then begins to expand that growing season. And we know people who grow all year round. They have figured out what plants to grow when to start them, what will tolerate, 10 degrees, 12 degrees, on up, all the way up. And then you use a whole bunch of other tools to do that. There's a lot more knowledge and time and attention. So that's all they do, that's all they do is grow. They grow a lot of food, but it requires commitment to that. So part of what we want you to do, and we're going to get on this in a little bit, is to have you research plants. Just like we are part of clans, we all belong to a clan. And my clan family, my immediate family is this plant, but I have another family that lives in another village. They're the same clan, but they're a different family. So we can look at the same thing. One of the biggest plant families that I'm beginning to love is called the Brassica family. And they include things like kale, broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, mustard, cabbage. So all those plants are just part of one family. They're all related. So if I learn about that family, most of the time their timing's the same, they like the same conditions. They have the same nutrient requirements, but guess what? They also have the same pests because If they like one, they like them all. So we begin to learn about plant families. So starting with a couple plants each year and learning what they like. What are they, cool? Are they warm? Do you have to plant them every year? What plant family are they? And that's where we want you to start. So other gardeners, this is another tool. Who's growing in your area? Me. This is why we're doing these classes. You can all share, begin getting to meet each other and seeing, what are you growing this year? Oh, she's growing arugula. I've never tried that. Tell me more about it by what you're growing. So we learn from each other, and what works and what doesn't work. And the biggest part is document your work. So I'm going to introduce something really quick. So document your work is your journal first and foremost, and your garden calendar. So some other tools you can learn are seed packets. When you buy seeds, there's a lot of information on the back of these seed packets. Right here, look, when to sow outside. Recommended 1 to 2 weeks after your last average frost date. Our average frost date is, remember I said middle of May. 2 weeks after that is the end of May. And I can't remember what seed, I don't even know what this says, cucumber. So they're saying, if you're going to put the seed in the ground, start putting it toward the end of May, roughly, would be for us. See, it doesn't tell you when, it just says 2 weeks after your average last frost. So pay attention to start documenting your overnight lows, temperatures. I do that every day with my calendar. Or when your soil temperatures reach at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't measure soil temperatures very much. That's a bit much for me. So I just kind of go with the frost date. What else can it tell us? It's the common name and the Latin name for the plant. Planting depth, spacing, how far apart should I plant these plants? Days until your plants emerge. So it tells you, okay, if I plant the seed in the ground and it germinates and comes up, how many days is that? That's really good if you're going to think about transplanting things. And there's a bunch of other things. So look at seed packets. They tell you a lot of information. This is a big one. Your decisions, your plans, and your commitment. All we can do is share with you what you can do, but it's up to you guys to decide how much time you're going to put into this. Because once you plant something, right, you can't walk away. You have to take care of that plant, whether it's a transplant indoors or whether it's outside. So you have to really decide, how much of my time do I want to give beyond the summer growing? If I put in another bid, how much time is that going to take me on top of what I'm already doing? I'm going to have to learn, maybe if I want to extend my season, if I want to try to have a tomato by May instead of July, what does that mean? What other tools do I need? What other knowledge do I need? Does that mean I can't go anywhere for those months? You have to begin figuring out what that kind of means for you. So this is really hard for anyone to no, none of us can give each other a growing calendar, because this is where you come in as the grower. What do I want to commit to? What can I handle? And what do I want to manage? Because once you grow something, you just can't stop. And you just need to be organized and focused the more you do stuff. That's just with anything. So let's go back to, I think I already talked about the growing calendar. I was going to talk about this, but it's just summer, right? It's a summer calendar. April through roughly September, October, harvest season is here. But if you want to grow things that harvest in March, guess what? Here's March. If you want to grow things that you're picking in March, guess what? We got to add some more months in back here. Because look at when we planted something in the ground, it probably popped up here and we're not picking till here. So we have to go backwards from when we want maybe to harvest something, or when we want to pick something, we kind of start working backwards once we know how long that plant takes to grow. So this is a handout we sent to you. You don't have to use it, but we just thought we sent it to you if you want to start documenting when we're looking at our transplants. And this is going to begin to help you figure out your growing calendar. So whether you're growing transplants or not, you might just be buying transplants, and that's okay. We can still use this form. So you see the plant variety. This might be, we might put tomato Better Boy tomato. That's the name of the actual tomato variety, is Better Boy, and it's a tomato. We're going to research whether it's a warm or cool weather plant. Is it an annual or perennial in our area? We don't care where anybody else, we only care about our own area. We're going to figure that out. We can research roughly how many weeks does it take to grow from a seed to a transplant that you see in the store. We can research that and figure that out for a tomato. Now, once we start our transplants in 2 weeks, that date, we're going to put that date right here. Oh, my cursor. That date we're going to put down when we started that transplant. If we use different kind of potting soil mixtures, you can document that here. If you only use one kind, you don't have to worry about this. I added some things that you might not need, but I use them. So sometimes I put warm weather plants like a tomato outside before it's warm. I'd use something called a wall of water to help protect it. It gives me 8 more weeks of growing time if I do that. So I have to put down in my thing, when did I do that last year? Because I'm going to do that this year. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You don't worry about that. Sometimes we put things outside again that we have to cover. This is all the extra steps that we take to make sure that plant is protected, because it's not meant to grow in a cold weather. So we're covering it. I can put that date down. So some of these might not be relevant to you right now. But we definitely want to figure out when we planted that, and then we're definitely going to, once we grow the seed up the plant up to a certain point, and we're going to put it outside, we're going to make sure that we put the date when we put it outside. So this really helps when you're growing your own transplants to help time those things out, because guess what, these are going to be different for each plant, unless they come from the same plant family. I think transplant date in greenhouse should be hardening off date. That's what this probably should be, but I'll change that if we need to. And then any other notes, like, I don't know, I might put something like, really liked Better Boy tomatoes, want to grow them again next year. You know, I might put that in my notes or something like that. But it begins to help you track just transplants. So you might not have done any of these. I mean, you might do the plant variety, warm weather, annual, needs weeks that need to grow, but you bought your transplant. So maybe one of these columns might be date transplant was purchased, and then date I put it outside. So you begin to remember next year, oh yeah, I started buying them in early May. May 10th was when I bought them, but I didn't get to put them out until May whatever, So this is your gauge and your reminder. I have organized or allowed for a couple of our master gardeners to share. I gave them some homework, and I asked them to share with you their research on what they did with a couple plants. I want you to see how research can be imported into this form to help you document. Calabrese, that's a Italian, so it's a broccoli. C for cool, annual, A for annual. When do we want this plant to go outside? What is our target date? Let's just choose. If we know the middle of May is so it's a cool weather plant. So our last frost date is roughly the middle of May. Maybe we should try and put this out on May 1st. Because it's still cool, because of the cool weather, it might be able to handle it. So if our target date to put this plant outside is May 1st, and it takes 5 to 6 weeks to start that plant, what does that new date look like to plant that seed? Let's just put 3/28 right here. And this March 28 is 5 to 6 weeks before May 1st, right? Broccoli, and this is just one variety. It's a cool weather. We have to plant it every year because it's an annual. It takes roughly, I'm going to just put 6 weeks to make it simple, 6 weeks to grow from when I plant it to when I put it outside. If I want to put it outside on May 1st, then we're going to count back 6 weeks from May 1st. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's March 20th, which is next Saturday. You see how we fill that in? growing broccoli that we want to put outside. This is not in a greenhouse. This is not in a hoop house. This is directly outside. We need to start those transplants by March 20th. Now we only did part of the growing season. The other half of the growing data will be, I'm going to start, once I plant that broccoli outside, I'm going to have to see, okay, how long is it going to take for that broccoli to grow till I pick it? Then I'm going to write that in my journal when I pick it. Maybe it's October. That gives you now a sense, wow, it took me that long to start if I'm going to grow my own transplants. This is just for that first part. Then we have the rest of the growing. Let's just break this up to 8 weeks. It takes 8 weeks to grow it out, and then we need 2 more weeks to prepare it and help it adjust to the outside, and then we're going to plant it outside. Because it's going to take a total of, I'm just going to go high, 10 weeks from May 26th. That's like this week. That's Wednesday, next Wednesday. So if you want to put some chilies, if you want to grow transplants to put outside on this date, you need to start them by March 17th. And we begin to figure out how long does it just take to grow transplants. Now we're going to use our journals to figure out, once we put them in the ground, we're going to document, when do we pick our first chili? There's research that'll tell you roughly you'll get chilies, so many weeks later. Once you see them, they'll give you that data. But I want you to track, once somebody grows a broccoli and puts it in the ground on May 1st and puts their chili in the ground on May 26th, you're going to use their journal to say, when did I pick my first chili? And then you write that down. Then now you have a sense, okay, gosh, if I start my own transplants, I got to get busy already by March 13th or 17th. Or I can just go buy transplants by May 26th and get the same results. But if I want to do all this part myself, there's 2 more months worth of work that I have to do. And all we did was track that first part of that plant's life. As it grows out, you're going to track the first harvest, and then you're going to track, when did that plant finally die? When did we get our last freeze this season? This form doesn't help you track that, but you'll track that in your journal. Does that make sense? Do you see where we're kind of going with this? And start tracking your overnight low temperatures, which are usually right before the sun comes up. You just check your temperature and see, what is it right now in my, either outside or in my phone, and just write it in your journal. That's the only way for you really to begin building a relationship with the environment where you are and getting to know it, because each of these plants will get, they all have their own places and temperatures they like to grow in. It's so connected to your time and commitment of what you can and want to grow. Your journal is going to be your data source for creating your growing calendar. That's all we have for you guys. We don't want to keep you longer than we have to. Thank you very much for coming. Have a great day.